Can broken trust with an avoidant partner actually be repaired in just 4 weeks? Trust repair with avoidance follows completely different rules than with other attachment styles. While most people rebuild trust through increased communication, emotional processing, and reassurance-seeking behaviors, these exact approaches often make trust issues worse with avoidant partners. Their nervous system interprets efforts to talk through problems as pressure and attempts to seek reassurance as evidence that you don't actually trust them to follow through on their commitments. The psychological foundation of why traditional methods fail lies in how avoidants learn to protect themselves from emotional overwhelm. Their early experiences often taught them that trusting others leads to disappointment, pressure, or loss of independence. When you focus on behavioral consistency without demanding acknowledgement, you're proving that you understand their emotional world without needing them to validate your understanding. When trust breaks down with an avoidant, whether through betrayal, broken promises, or accumulated disappointments, the path back isn't through dramatic gestures or emotional conversations. It's through consistent, small actions that demonstrate reliability without creating pressure for them to reciprocate emotionally or verbally acknowledge the repair process. The 4-week time frame isn't arbitrary. It represents the minimum amount of time needed for an avoidance system to observe new patterns without feeling like they're being managed or manipulated. Shorter time frames feel like performance pressure, while longer time frames can feel overwhelming or indefinite. 4 weeks allows enough space for authentic behavior change while providing a concrete endpoint that doesn't trigger their fear of endless emotional labor. Most people who try to rebuild trust with avoidance fail because they approach it like a traditional relationship repair process. They want to talk about what went wrong, process the emotions around the breach of trust, get reassurance about the future, and create agreements about how to prevent similar problems. But each of these well-intentioned efforts can actually reinforce the avoidance belief that relationships are emotionally exhausting and controlling. Week 1 focuses entirely on demonstrating respect for their autonomy without any expectation of reciprocation or acknowledgement. This isn't about grand gestures or obvious attempts to win them back. It's about showing through your actions that you understand their need for space and choice, even in the context of repair. During this first week, your primary task is eliminating any behavior that could be interpreted as pursuit or attempts to force emotional connection. This means no relationship talks, no processing conversations about the trust issue, and no seeking reassurance about where you stand. When they withdraw or create distance, you respect it without comment or visible distress. The goal is to demonstrate that you can manage your own emotions about the trust issue without requiring them to fix your feelings or provide constant updates about their internal process. This shows them that working on the relationship won't mean becoming responsible for your emotional regulation, which is often their deepest fear about relationship repair. You might find this approach counterintuitive because most relationship advice emphasizes communication and working through issues together. But with avoidance, the communication comes after trust is re-established, not as a method for re-establishing it. They need to feel safe from emotional demands before they can engage authentically in any kind of relationship processing. During this week, focus on being consistently pleasant and reliable in small, everyday interactions without making these interactions about the relationship or the trust issue. If you live together, this might mean maintaining normal household routines, being helpful without being asked, and showing up for practical responsibilities without expecting praise or acknowledgement. Week 2 introduces the concept of predictable reliability in low-stakes situations. This is where you begin demonstrating trustworthiness through actions rather than words. The key is choosing small commitments that you can absolutely follow through on, rather than making bigger promises that might be harder to keep consistently. This might involve being punctual for plans you make together, following through on small favors or tasks you offer to handle, or maintaining consistent communication patterns without being overwhelming. The goal is to show that your word means something in contexts that don't feel emotionally charged or relationship-focused. Avoidants pay attention to reliability in practical matters as evidence of whether someone can be trusted in emotional matters. If you say you'll pick up groceries and then forget, or if you promise to handle something and then need reminders, it reinforces their belief that people can't be depended upon when it really matters. During this week, you're also demonstrating emotional stability by not reacting strongly to their continued distance or any testing behaviors they might engage in. They often unconsciously test whether relationship repair efforts are genuine by being more difficult or withdrawn than usual. Your ability to remain calm and consistent during this testing phase shows them that your efforts aren't dependent on their immediate positive response. Week 3 is when you begin addressing the trust issue indirectly through changed behavior rather than direct conversation. This is the most delicate phase because you're starting to show that you've learned from whatever caused the trust break without explicitly making it about learning or growth. If the trust issue involved broken promises, this week focuses on under-promising and over-delivering in similar situations. If it involved emotional neglect, you demonstrate attentiveness without overwhelming them. If it involved boundary violations, you show respect for their boundaries even when they don't explicitly state them. The key is making these changes feel natural and sustainable rather than like conscious efforts to prove something. Avoidance can sense when behavior change is performative versus authentic, and performative change actually reinforces their belief that people can't be trusted to maintain positive changes long-term. This week also involves demonstrating that you can take responsibility for your part in the trust issue without needing them to validate your self-awareness or forgive you on your timeline. You show accountability through changed behavior rather than through verbal acknowledgement or emotional processing. You might find yourself wanting to point out the changes you're making or seek acknowledgement for your efforts. Resist this impulse completely. The moment you make your changes about getting credit or recognition, they stop being about rebuilding trust and start being about getting your own emotional needs met. Week 4 focuses on creating space for them to choose to re-engage without pressure or expectation. This is often the hardest week because you've been doing all this work and your attachment system wants to see evidence that it's working. But premature pushing for acknowledgement or progress updates can undo everything you've built in the previous 3 weeks. During this final week, you maintain all the positive changes from the previous weeks while subtly creating opportunities for them to initiate connection or acknowledgement if they're ready. This might mean being available when they want to talk without bringing up relationship topics yourself, or creating situations where they can choose to spend time together without feeling obligated. The goal is to demonstrate that your change behavior is sustainable and not contingent on their immediate reciprocation. They need to see that positive changes will continue even if they don't respond with immediate enthusiasm or gratitude. This week often involves them testing whether your changes are permanent or just a strategy to win them back. They might be more distant than usual, more critical of your efforts, or more skeptical about your motivations. Your ability to maintain your positive changes without becoming defensive or discouraged shows them that your efforts are genuine. By the end of 4 weeks, you've created a body of evidence that demonstrates trustworthiness through actions rather than words. You've shown respect for their autonomy, consistency in small matters, accountability for past issues, and sustainable positive change that doesn't require their validation to maintain. This doesn't guarantee that they'll immediately return to full trust or emotional openness, but it creates conditions where they can choose to begin lowering their defenses without feeling pressured or manipulated. The trust repair becomes their choice rather than your project, which is essential for it to feel authentic to them. The success of this approach depends entirely on your ability to focus on your own behavior rather than trying to control their response. Many people start this process but then become frustrated when they don't see immediate acknowledgement or appreciation for their efforts. This frustration often leads to behaviors that undermine the entire 4-week investment. Remember that avoidants often don't verbally acknowledge positive changes even when they notice and appreciate them. They might show their recognition through subtle changes in their behavior, being slightly more available, less defensive, or more willing to engage in everyday interactions. Learning to recognize these subtle signals prevents you from becoming discouraged and reverting to approaches that create pressure. One common mistake during this process is trying to speed things up by directly addressing the trust repair efforts. Asking questions like, Do you notice I've been different? Or, are you feeling better about us? Immediately puts them in the position of having to evaluate and respond to your efforts, which feels demanding and can trigger withdrawal. Another mistake is using your changed behavior as leverage for getting your own needs met. If you've been respecting their space but then use that as justification for demanding more communication, you've turned your positive changes into a transaction rather than genuine growth. The most successful trust repair happens when your changes feel authentic and sustainable to both of you. This means only committing to changes that you can maintain long-term without resentment, and only making changes that align with becoming the kind of partner you actually want to be, rather than just what you think they want. Managing your own emotional state throughout the 4 weeks becomes crucial for success. If you're feeling anxious, frustrated, or resentful about having to prove your trustworthiness, these emotions will likely leak into your interactions and undermine your efforts. They're particularly sensitive to hidden agendas and emotional pressure, even when it's not explicitly expressed. This means you need to do your own emotional work alongside the trust repair process. This might involve therapy, journaling, talking to friends who can provide support, or engaging in activities that help you maintain your own emotional balance. The goal is to approach the 4 weeks from a place of genuine desire to improve the relationship, rather than from desperation to fix things quickly. The approach requires you to take full responsibility for your part in the trust breakdown without expecting reciprocal accountability from your partner. This doesn't mean accepting all the blame or taking responsibility for their behavior, but it does mean focusing entirely on what you can control rather than what they should be doing differently. This can feel unbalanced, especially if the trust issue involved behaviors on both sides, or if you feel like you've been accommodating their attachment style throughout the relationship. The approach requires you to temporarily set aside questions of reciprocity in service of creating conditions where trust can rebuild. Some people find this one-sided approach incompatible with their own attachment needs. If you require regular reassurance, verbal processing, or immediate acknowledgement of your efforts to feel secure in relationships, this approach might be too challenging to maintain authentically. The 4-week time frame creates natural pressure points where you might feel tempted to abandon the approach. Week 2 often brings frustration about the lack of obvious progress. Week 3 can trigger anxiety about whether your efforts are being noticed at all. Week 4 might create urgency to start seeing results or have conversations about the process. Anticipating these pressure points and planning how you'll handle them increases your chances of completing the full 4 weeks authentically. This might involve having specific self-care strategies for difficult days, predetermined responses for when you feel like giving up, or support systems you can access when you need encouragement to continue. The approach assumes that both people genuinely want the relationship to continue and that the trust break wasn't so severe that it fundamentally damaged the foundation of the relationship. Some betrayals or patterns of behavior create trust breaks that can't be repaired through changed behavior alone. If the trust issue involved ongoing deception, major betrayals that violate core values, or patterns that suggest fundamental incompatibility rather than attachment-style differences, this approach might not be sufficient. It works best for trust breaks that arose from misunderstandings, communication failures, or behaviors that were hurtful but not intentionally destructive. Successfully completing this process doesn't guarantee that your relationship will return to its previous state, or that all trust issues will be permanently resolved. Trust repair is often an ongoing process rather than a one-time fix, and maintaining trust requires continued attention to the behaviors and patterns that support it. However, successfully completing 4 weeks of consistent, respectful behavior often creates a new foundation for the relationship that can support deeper trust over time. It demonstrates to both of you that positive change is possible and that the relationship can survive and grow from challenges rather than being permanently damaged by them. The skills you develop during this process, emotional regulation, consistency, patience with gradual change, and focus on your own actions rather than trying to control outcomes, are valuable for maintaining any relationship, but particularly important for relationships with avoidant partners. Many people report that even when the specific trust issue doesn't fully resolve in 4 weeks, the process teaches them a more effective way of relating to their avoidant partner that improves many other aspects of the relationship. They learn to show care and commitment in ways that feel safe rather than overwhelming, which benefits the relationship beyond just the trust repair. The most important insight from this approach is that trust with avoidance is built through consistent demonstration rather than verbal commitment. They need to see evidence over time that you're reliable, respectful, and genuine, rather than just hearing promises about future behavior. This understanding can fundamentally change how you approach not just trust repair, but ongoing relationship maintenance. What makes this approach particularly challenging is that it goes against most of our natural instincts about relationship repair. When trust breaks down, we typically want to talk about it, process what happened, get reassurance that it won't happen again, and feel acknowledged for the pain the breach caused. But with avoidance, these natural responses often make the trust issue worse rather than better. The psychological resistance you might feel to this approach is completely normal. It can feel unfair to have to prove your trustworthiness through sustained effort without getting verbal acknowledgement or emotional reciprocation. It can feel one-sided to focus entirely on your behavior while they continue their patterns of distance and emotional unavailability. But this resistance often comes from misunderstanding what trust repair actually accomplishes. You're not just fixing a specific issue, you're demonstrating that you understand their emotional world well enough to navigate it successfully. You're proving that you can be in relationship with them without triggering their deepest fears about losing autonomy or being controlled. This broader demonstration of understanding often has effects that extend far beyond the original trust issue. Many people report that completing this process successfully changes the entire dynamic of their relationship because they've learned to interact in ways that feel safe rather than threatening to their avoidant partner. The temptation to speed up the process or seek feedback about your progress becomes most intense during week 3. You've been consistently showing up for 2.5 weeks, and your attachment system is desperately seeking some sign that your efforts are being noticed and appreciated. This is when most people either abandon the approach or sabotage it by asking for acknowledgement. Understanding that this urge for validation is normal and predictable helps you prepare for it rather than being surprised when it hits. Having specific strategies for managing this impulse, like calling a friend, journaling about your feelings, or engaging in activities that remind you of your own worth outside the relationship, can prevent you from undermining your progress. One aspect that many people overlook is how this process affects your own relationship with trust and security. When you complete 4 weeks of consistent, respectful behavior, regardless of their response, you're proving to yourself that you can be reliable and trustworthy even under difficult circumstances. This internal sense of integrity often becomes more valuable than whatever external validation you were seeking. The approach also teaches you to derive satisfaction from your own growth and positive choices rather than from other people's responses to those choices. This shift in focus often improves not just your relationship with your avoidant partner, but your overall emotional well-being and sense of self-worth. Many people discover that the skills they develop during this process, emotional regulation under pressure, consistency despite lack of feedback, focus on personal behavior rather than trying to control outcomes, serve them well in all areas of life. The 4-week investment often pays dividends far beyond the specific relationship issue you're trying to address. It's worth noting that this approach works best when both people have a baseline level of care and respect for each other, even if trust has been damaged. If the relationship involves ongoing emotional abuse, manipulation, or fundamental disrespect, changing your behavior alone won't create the safety needed for trust to rebuild. The method assumes that your avoidant partner is operating from legitimate attachment fears rather than from malicious intent or character issues that make them fundamentally untrustworthy. If their behavior patterns suggest deeper issues with honesty, integrity, or respect for boundaries, this approach might not be sufficient to address the underlying problems. Some people find that completing this process helps them gain clarity about whether their relationship issues are truly about attachment style differences or about more fundamental incompatibilities. When you consistently show up in healthy ways and still don't see any movement toward greater trust or connection, it provides valuable information about the relationship's potential. The 4-week time frame is also long enough to reveal whether your partner is capable of recognizing and appreciating positive changes, even if they don't verbally acknowledge them. If they show no behavioral shifts whatsoever in response to sustained positive changes on your part, it might indicate that the trust issues run deeper than attachment style differences. This doesn't necessarily mean the relationship is doomed, but it does suggest that professional help might be needed to address whatever is preventing them from responding to consistent positive treatment. Sometimes individual therapy or couples counseling becomes necessary to work through the deeper issues that make trust feel impossible. The approach is designed to be sustainable and authentic rather than performative, which means it should feel like a natural evolution of how you want to show up in relationships, rather than a forced change that requires constant effort to maintain. If you find yourself feeling resentful or exhausted by the end of 4 weeks, it might indicate that this particular relationship dynamic isn't compatible with your authentic way of being. Success with this method often depends on your motivation for attempting it. If you're doing it because you genuinely want to become a more reliable and trustworthy partner, the process usually feels meaningful and worthwhile regardless of the specific outcome. If you're doing it primarily to get a certain response from your partner, the lack of immediate feedback often makes it feel futile and frustrating. The difference between these motivations often determines whether you can complete the full 4 weeks authentically. When your efforts are genuinely about personal growth and becoming the kind of partner you want to be, you're less dependent on their specific responses for validation and satisfaction. This approach also requires accepting that trust repair might look different with an avoidant partner than it would with other attachment styles. Instead of tearful conversations and renewed commitments, you might see subtle increases in their availability, slightly less defensiveness in everyday interactions, or greater willingness to include you in their daily life. Learning to recognize and appreciate these quieter forms of progress prevents you from missing the signs that your efforts are actually working. Avoidants rarely provide the dramatic acknowledgments or emotional breakthroughs that might signal progress in other types of relationships. The ultimate measure of success isn't whether they explicitly acknowledge your efforts or provide verbal confirmation that trust has been repaired. The measure is whether they begin to relax their defenses and show greater willingness to be vulnerable with you over time, even if they never directly connect this change to your 4-week investment. Sometimes the most profound shifts happen months after you've completed the process, when they've had time to integrate the experience of being treated consistently well without pressure or expectation. The delayed response can be frustrating, but it often indicates that real, sustainable change is taking place rather than just temporary behavioral modifications. What trust repair strategies have you tried with avoidant partners, and which approaches seem to help versus hurt the process? Share in the comments your experiences with rebuilding trust across different attachment styles. If this helped you understand a different approach to trust repair with avoidant partners, like this video and subscribe for more insights about creating secure relationship dynamics. Thanks for watching.